Hello, I'm Elijah Mundy of KJIW 94.5 FM, 50,000 watts of power serving Arkansas, Mississippi, and Memphis, Tennessee, and I am your moderator for this occasion. I welcome you to this forum of men of God, here to talk about certain issues confronting our nation and churches, and to bring in the perfect counsel and righteousness of God to set the record straight on a lot of false lies and misguided thinking and information being put out that is in and of itself a pandemic. I have participating in this forum with me today Pastor Milton Hall of the Bible Deliverance Church in Marianna, Arkansas. How are you, Pastor
Great.
Hall?
I'm great to see them.
Also, Pastor Leroy Carter of the Uplifting Ministries out of Crumrod, Arkansas. How are you, Pastor Carter?
I'm fine, Elijah.
Also, Minister T.J. Hunt out of Virginia. Which part of Virginia are you, Minister Hunt?
I am in Manassas, Virginia.
Manassas, Virginia. Okay, how's the weather out there?
Doing is very well. Spring weather, perfect. Blue skies, no clouds in the sky at all.
All right. And we have a special guest, Pastor Vincent Matthews of the Tabernacle Church of God in Christ in South Haven, Mississippi. And he's a world traveler, been doing missionary work all in Africa and all over the world. And I just want to say to you, welcome, Bishop Matthews.
Thank you. It's an honor to be with you, an honor once again to be on KJIW.
Okay, and this forum is taking place here at the beautiful facilities of the Tabernacle Church of God in Christ, located at 7701 US 51 in South Haven, Mississippi. Welcome, gentlemen, and let's hope we can have a discussion here that's going to be fruitful to a lot of people.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, if you are having some kind of a problem and you go to a doctor or a medical expert, it is very important that the doctor diagnose accurately what is wrong and the source of it. If they are wrong in their diagnosis, they will be treating you on the basis of an inaccurate diagnosis, and you could get worse or die. There's so much onslaught of irresponsible, misguided, and false information coming across the airwaves through regular news, cable news, and their pundits, social media, politicians, and so-called community leaders, and it is creating havoc in our nation and in many of our churches. It is another example of what the Bible calls a device of Satan. His schemes, how he hoodwink and seduce people to look away from God so they can die and go to hell. Everybody got an opinion and have something to say. What is missing in all of this is what does God have to say about it? What are his laws and commands to solve the problems and to, very importantly, to avoid unnecessary problems? God calls it sin because it's transgression, and transgression is breaking God's law. What he has said, and there are damnations in breaking God's law. There are a lot of issues and subjects to talk about, and in this forum, we're going to talk about two subjects. Subject number one is it true, as has been portrayed by the news media, pundits, on cable news, advocacy movements, politicians, and so-called community leaders, that the police are out to target and kill black people? That's subject number one. And time-wise, we hope to get to question number two on this edition, and that is the United States of America in this new millennium, 2021 especially, in comparison to the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, a systemic racist country? Are we still like it was then? And what is the danger of trying to push that idea into the minds of many Americans? I'm going to start out with the first question to Pastor Leroy Carter. Pastor Carter, is it true, as has been portrayed by the news media, pundits on cable news, advocacy movements, politicians, and so-called leaders, that the police are out to target and kill black people?
Well, according to what we have witnessed on television, from video footage, the police always shows up when they are called. There may have been one instance where the police was just driving along and this guy walked out in the street, but normally when there is an encounter with the authorities, they are called by someone being victimized. They don't just go around hunt down black people to stop an assault.
So it's not true that, according to what you just said, that police are out to target and kill black people?
From what we can see, no.
Okay. Pastor Milton Hall.
Well, I agree with what Pastor Carter is saying, because what is being portrayed and the way this narrative is being played through secular news media, it is driving an agenda, and people need to be aware of that. We need to make sure that we understand that this is an agenda, and it's not necessarily a political or right or left agenda. This is a spiritual agenda. And we have to keep that in mind, that and look at and observe what is going on. How does this feed into the end game of the enemy, that which is Satan, the enemy of all people, regardless of what race, color, or creed? The enemy, his purpose is to steal, kill, and to destroy. And that's how we identify who's the source. And we can identify who's the source of what's happening, then you can put the blame in the right place. But listening to the news media, you will be deceived, because they are promoting an agenda, and it actually is Satan's agenda. But Satan uses people just like God uses people to carry out his purposes and plan. So no, I don't think that that's a correct or accurate observation, because that is only based on what the news media is telling us. We don't ever see the good deeds that all the other officers are doing. We're only looking at a small few that's being played in our hearing or sight over and over and over and over and over again, which is for control purposes, and people need to understand that.
Pastor Matthews.
Yes, I think what Pastor Carter and Pastor Hall have said are very relevant and true. And I would just want to add that I agree that there's an agenda that's there. Now, I do want to say, first, I want to acknowledge that there are disparities and there are biases, right, not only in the United States but around the world. Where you have people, there are going to be biases and things of that sort. But the narrative that I've had people call me, because we have 8 sons, just as you have many sons, and say, "Don't let your boys leave out. They're coming to get them, and they're going to die." That is not the narrative, that young people are being hunted. Now, there are children being hunted and killed, but that's in abortion clinics, and we can't talk about that. You know, they just point to the few examples around the country. So I would agree with my brothers to say that the police are not hunting down individuals, or we wouldn't have made it here today. Yeah, we wouldn't have made it here in South Haven, Mississippi. We wouldn't be here. We drove from all over the area.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, bottom line, generally, what usually causes an escalation in an encounter with a police officer that could lead to a police officer having to use force or his gun. If a police officer have to use force, is it pretty? Is it a pretty thing if he has to use force, especially if a suspect is very combative and violent? Pastor Hall.
Oh no, that's not. That's a very bad situation, and I agree that there are. You know, as Pastor Matthew said, you know, it from what it looks like, it is a bad situation. But as far as them pursuing black people to hunt them down, I don't think that's not true. And to your question, you were saying, does it look good when somebody's shot down? No. But what leads up to that is when an officer, people have to understand, when an officer issues a command, you need to respect that. And we have to also understand, in this environment and in this atmosphere that has been created by the media, officers have to think about their own lives. They have families that they want to go home to, and they can't take any unnecessary chances, especially with the atmosphere that has been created especially when they pull a black person over. And this is only talked about when a black person is shot by or murdered by a white cop. There's a lot of other black murders being happening that we don't talk about, or the media don't talk about, so people need to be aware of that. But no, I think what leads up to that is that when a person refuses to obey the command of an officer.
Okay, now in the many black communities, what is the greatest fear of black people in many of the black communities? Is it the police officer? Is it the white supremacists? Is it the Ku Klux Klan? Or is it other black people?
No, we know that the greatest fear is another black man. We know that.
And what is it that other black man might do to you? I'm not talking about all black neighborhoods, but in a lot of black neighborhoods.
Right. I mean, the fear is that you would be murdered. I mean, actually, let's think about how many was being murdered by one another. We fear another black man. I've seen this change, and we would get to this other subject. I would like to interject that how things have changed now. Really, our worst enemy is us, and we fear one another more. Just like now, we're having a situation where we're shooting up each other, even in our small neighborhoods. We're not talking about Chicago, California, New York. This thing is escalated because, and I believe that really that's because they're seeing that. That's what people are seeing. That's how they're solving problems. That's how they think that issues need to be solved or differences need to be solved, and they're not hearing the other side of the story.
Okay, the Bible teaches two kinds of suffering. There's a suffering for righteousness, and there's a suffering for evil doing and bad behavior.
Okay. Is that for me?
No. Okay, now, the Bible does teach that. You all agree with that.
Right.
I want to ask Minister T.J. Hunt, there's been a number of high-profile police shootings that has been in the news. You can even mention Michael Brown, who was killed by a police officer August the 9th, 2014, in Ferguson, Missouri, that resulted in a lot of rioting and controversy. Michael Brown later was even portrayed as a gentle giant. Can you elaborate on some of these high-profile shootings as it relates to what God talks about in His Word, suffering from righteousness and suffering from bad behavior and evil doing?
Sure.
This question to you, Mr. Hunt.
So I think this is a result of not allowing all the information to come through and making hasty judgments. You mentioned Michael Brown. This was the situation where there was a young unarmed 19-year-old black man who was killed by a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. And the narrative was that he held his hands up. He said, "Hands up, don't shoot." But that doesn't actually agree with reality. The facts say that the officer received this call that a local convenience store had been robbed. The officer met two guys that fit that description of the store thieves. When the officer requested the two men go to the sidewalk, Michael Brown refused. And when the officer tried to get out of his car, Michael Brown blocked the door, punching the officer through the window. Then he reached for the officer's gun, and then a struggle ensued. Officer eventually fired his gun, wounding Michael Brown in his hand. Michael Brown ran away from the vehicle, and then the officer pursued him. Suddenly, though, Michael Brown turned around and ran toward the officer full charge. He charged at the officer. So the officer fired several shots at him. When Michael Brown stopped, the officer stopped shooting. Then when Michael Brown charged again, the officer shot 3 or 4 more times, eventually killing him. And this is supported by forensic evidence. Michael Brown never said, "Hands up, don't shoot." That was a lie. That was a lie said by his friend that was eventually debunked. But we have several other occasions that show that the cause of death was really the result of bad behavior or resisting arrest. You have Breonna Taylor. That narrative was that the police did a sort of a no-knock raid on her house and killed her as she was sleeping in her home. But that is actually not true. Breonna Taylor's boyfriend was an accused drug trafficker. It was believed he used Breonna's apartment as a stash house. This is why police obtained a warrant to search her house to begin with. Officers both knocked and announced their presence at the apartment and only entered when they didn't receive an answer. The man that Breonna Taylor was sleeping with, which was not her boyfriend, it was another drug dealer. He opened fire as the officers entered the house. And then, of course, all the officers then opened fire, eventually killing Breonna. This was a kill or be killed situation. When the officer began shooting, when the man she was sleeping with began shooting, the officers responded as they were trained to do. It just so happened that Breonna got hit in the crossfire. And we all know about, say, Trayvon Martin. The initial narrative was that he was a sweet-faced choir boy who was brutally set upon and murdered by a white racist. But the facts tell a different story. Martin was a low-level thug and drug user. George Zimmerman was a Hispanic man, not a white man. He saw him sort of skulking around the neighborhood. He called 911. He kept an eye on Martin to keep the 911 operator apprised of Martin's activities. Martin attacked Zimmerman and was beating him to death when Zimmerman fired a shot and killed him. We just had a recent experience with Ma'Khia Bryant. She was a young girl that was shot by a white police officer very recently, but she was in the process of stabbing another girl right in front of him, in front of the whole neighborhood. And we know about Rayshard Brooks. He's the guy that was at the Wendy's in Georgia, the black man killed by policemen. He was sleeping in his car in the drive-through lane at Wendy's. When the officers arrived, they woke him and had him move his car. Testing revealed that Brooks was intoxicated. And because of that, the officers decided to try to cuff him. So Brooks resisted arrest and began fighting with police. He managed to steal the officer's taser and started running away. The police started chasing him, and then suddenly Brooks turned around and fired the taser at the officer. The officer responded by firing at Brooks, killing him. So in all these situations, they met their untimely demise because of bad behavior. Had they actually obeyed the officer and complied, they probably would still be alive today.
Thank you, Minister Hunt. Pastor Matthews, police officers should act with proper and good behavior when encountering a citizen. However, do citizens or individuals also have a responsibility to behave properly with good behavior when encountering a police officer? What does God have to say about this when if you consider the book of Romans 13 in the Bible about submitting to the powers that be or submitting to authority? Is that the responsibility of citizens also, not just the police officer, but citizens also needs to be mindful of their behavior?
Thank you, Dr. Monday. That's a great question. First of all, any police officer who acts outside of the regulations that are set and the things that are defined in their training and in the laws should be punished or prosecuted. However, your question goes deeper than that. And so having said that, we as citizens have a certain responsibility. And I think that as Pastor Hall mentioned earlier, we have a challenge with the Trojan horse that's being pushed in. As citizens, we do have a responsibility to be law-abiding, to follow the laws of the land and to fulfill the things that are before us. And as Pastor TJ has mentioned earlier, he talked about these misrepresentations. I think that we can look at the fact that in our community, because we're talking about black people, in the black community, almost 80% of the homes are fatherless. And the breakdown of our family is a microcosm or actually a symptom of what we're seeing in society. And so you have young men and young women who not only are raised in single parent families, but that spirit of anarchy that's there, exacerbated or made worse by the celebration of using even things like alcohol, drugs like alcohol and marijuana, which causes behavior, just as he talked about just a moment ago. And no one and everybody thinks and everybody talks about smoking weed as this benign, cool you out kind of stuff. And right now, the weed that is out there is 10 times more potent than what they had at Woodstock, and it's causing psychosis and causing people to literally have to be put down with straitjackets and all types of things that are happening. And then it further is exacerbated by the fact that spirit of anarchy that you're saying. So yes, Romans 13 tells us to obey the authorities, but you have children who have been raised without a God. They've been their own God, without a parent. They haven't listened to anybody and don't even listen to teachers. Working in education, you see what's happening. But even further than that, I think I'm answering your question. Even further than that, the big challenge is that this lawlessness is being used as a Trojan horse to push a whole nother agenda, because even with this, even those who protest against black children being shot and things of that sort, they don't really care about black people. They want to destroy families. They said that the nuclear family, and even in the Black Lives Matter platform, the nuclear family is Western prescribed, and that is a white thing. Genesis 2 tells us that this is why a man should leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. But in addition to that, they want to destroy family, and they talk more, and then they talk about being woke and being black, but then they engage in a folly of 2% of the white population and support transgenderism, which is not even our issue. And so they want to destroy the family, support transgenderism, support non-binary lifestyles, and they're using this narrative of pain being afflicted upon black lives to be really the way that they're pushing a whole nother agenda to really turn out society. And so, yes, we have a responsibility to stand up, to be law-abiding, but to really follow the word of God. And when we do the things of God, we find ourselves on the right side of the law. It's not to say that bad things don't happen, but it's this narrative of that just black men are being hunted down. It's ludicrous.
Well, you hear the chant, no justice, no peace. And what I want to ask here, what is important to God is God's justice. That's what's important. The Bible teaches that there's a reaping and sowing in God's law, Galatians 6:7. If you are involved in criminal behavior or bad behavior that results in your demise, is this a reaping and sowing of God's justice and God's law for that criminal or bad behavior? You look at all the cases that's high profile where bad behavior was. Should people look at this and say that even though they, maybe the police could have used better discretion, but had they have not been practicing bad behavior, had they have not been doing criminal activities, that would not have happened?
True. I would say, and I would also like to add on to what Bishop Matthew was saying about the agenda, especially with BLM. And people need to understand this, can be able to see this, that they're not really concerned for looking out for the best interest of black people. If they were, they would be dealing with the issues that you just brought up. You would be telling, instead of portraying, all you see is a white cop killing a black cop and promote that narrative. They would also be trying to tell people how to respond when you are stopped by a police officer. You should be putting the information out there saying when you are stopped by a police officer, then you need to follow the commands, not resist like most of them are doing. And that is and again, that takes us to what you're saying. You reap what you sow. If you sow evil, you're going to reap evil. If you sow to the flesh, you're going to reap corruption. Either, as Bishop brought out earlier, either in this life or the next life, you're going to reap what you sow. And that's why when you disrespect the police officer, you disrespect the command, you threaten them, and you try to wrestle with them, and you already see how the atmosphere is, then you need to use your head. If I want to live, then I don't need to do that. I don't need to act like these people are acting. And they're not promoting that narrative. telling people how to act, how to respond when you are stopped by a police officer. See, and then you end up reaping what you sow.
Is it wrong, and you look at all the high-profile cases, is it wrong to make heroes and role models of these individuals in these high-profile cases who had lifestyles of criminal behavior or bad behavior? For example, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said that George Floyd died for justice. She actually said that.
She did.
What's wrong with that statement? Who wants to take that?
Well, if you're going to make a hero out of a lawbreaker, you're going to make a hero out of someone that create havoc in his own community, then that says to the young people, children come along behind them, that you can create all kinds of havoc and break all kinds of laws, and you can be labeled as a hero. We need good role models for our children coming along behind us. In order to be a good role model, you need to, first of all, be a law-abiding citizen. You need to be a good person at home as well as in your community. You need to set a standard of righteousness first, that others can follow your example in life, that they can live a productive life, a life free from being fearful of people in authority. So Nancy Pelosi, she had an agenda to say that George Floyd died for justice. He was breaking the law when the police got involved. So I don't know how could she come away with he died as a hero and a figure for justice. If he hadn't been violating the law would never have been there.
Can I add to that?
I think, yeah.
If they had, if now I feel this because this is something that's serious. If they had merely made George Floyd and others heroes, it would be wrong, but it's benign. But it even goes a bit deeper than that. They're actually evoking demonic spirits and blood sacrifice, because even at George Floyd's funeral, there was a preacher who quoted Isaiah 53. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquity. Chastisement of his peace was upon us. And with his stripes, we are healed. He referred what was referred a messianic prophecy to Jesus to George Floyd. And Patrice Cullors and others who founded Black Lives Matter, they know and they recognize when they say their name, they're doing what has happened in traditional African religions, animist religions, of speaking of the dead to evoke the spirit of the dead to work on your behalf. And so they're engaged in deep level witchcraft. This is straight up witchcraft that's happening right now. And people unwittingly are participating in witchcraft, celebrating the bloodshed of individuals and thinking that it's because we've been hurt and racism have happened over time. We say, well, yeah, there's a black man that died. And people don't understand that they're really evoking demonic spirits as they do these things. And so they wittingly know that. So Nancy Pelosi, because remember now, Nancy Pelosi said this, but remember just before that, the brother who from St. Louis who prayed at the beginning of our congressional hearings, who prayed in the name of the God of the Hindu gods, and said "I man" and "I woman." Now, the "I man" and "I woman" is what everybody focuses on, but he was evoking Hindu gods, and so these people are going for broke. If you are black and if you are for the black cause, you got to go totally left against Christ, against the God of the Bible, even in racial theory. If you want to be free, you got to be free from the God of the Bible, from Yahweh himself. And then these things are being pushed forward. So it's very sinister. And so they know what they're doing. They're getting people to unwittingly try to be involved in ancestral worship as well as in demon deification.
Well, let me just throw this question in. Why do these pundits that you see on cable news, CNN and MSNBC and others, and the politicians and so-called community leaders do not want to talk about the bad lifestyle of these individuals that brought on their lifestyle, that brought on their demise? Why is it like you dare not talk about George Floyd, you dare not talk about Michael Brown, strong arm robbing that store? You bring that up and boy, you will be attacked. Why is that?
Okay. I can answer that one. because the black community is largely broken because our families are largely broken, and there is a natural anger because of what is missing. And so there are forces that are trying to keep us angry and emotional and to direct that anger into destructive paths that will keep us broken continually. But why is that? That is because we are a reliable voting bloc for a particular ideology. And if we begin to identify with Christ and we begin to follow Yahweh and we begin to establish biblical principles about family and behavior, then all of a sudden we will stop these destructive paths and these destructive behaviors that will keep us so broken. We will begin to start to be successful. We will begin to prosper and think for ourselves and think outside of our emotions. When that happens, we're no longer a reliable voting bloc that they can take advantage of every couple of years when they want to get an agenda passed.
That's
Okay.
right.
Excellent. Excellent. I
Now,
agree with that.
now there are those so-called leaders, I've heard this, that say rioting and looting is a good way of communicating to send a message to America. There was a lady down in Texas was actually justifying it and saying it is good. Now, when people riot and loot, are they breaking God's commandments of stealing? Who wants to take that?
Riotous living. You're going against the grain, destructive. And then again, who is behind that? What spirit is driving that? And the Bible talks about the thief coming not but for to steal, kill, and to destroy. So that goes diametrically opposed to what God says when you are out here destroying property, destroying people's lives, innocent people who have nothing to do with what's going on. I mean, businesses, well, these are innocent people. You're wrecking their lives. You're destroying their lives. That couldn't be God. So what we are seeing here is the spirit of Antichrist at work. And all this stuff goes against the Bible. And back along, if I can go back, if we got time to go back to one, I want to add on to what Bishop was saying about, I think the question was about glorifying or making heroes out of these people that are being actually criminals. And what Brother TJ said, if I could tie it together, with all the brokenness in our families due to the broken homes and the lack of purpose, for a lot of these young men, the lack of attention, the lack of self-fulfillment and self-gratification, when you glorify these wrongdoers, celebrate them and heroize them, then many of them will do those things and act like just for the attention. They want to get the attention. They want to be a part of. They want to be recognized. They want to be acknowledged. And we see that happening because and the BLM and those that are promoting the left, the socialist agendas that we see in our society right now, they're promoting that and leading these people into making people think that it's all right to do that because they're going to be celebrated.
And also, if I can, before we move on, another way that Satan uses this culture to get people to think that wrong is right and right is wrong is by celebrating those who break the law, those who violate the law. They celebrate those people. So therefore, young people grow up seeing that this is a way to get attention. This is the way to get to be successful. If I go against the grain, if I act out in a rebellious way, or what once was a rebellious way, but is no longer seen as rebellious conduct, because you get to be glorified if you die for a cause that is anti-God. Anything that get God out of the public's mind is glorified today. As you brought in abortion, transgenders, which is no such thing because either you're a man or a woman.
Wow.
Anything to get your mind off of God is glorified today. Right. And I think this is just a way that Satan uses to get people to no longer rely on God as a way of sustaining life and bettering life.
Okay, now, what is also born out of this, and this is tying in with some of the things that you're saying, defunding the police. And there's a movie they made. I didn't see the whole film, but I do remember the song. And it says, dun, 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 dun. Who are you gonna call? And it says Ghostbusters. Okay, so if there's shooting in your neighborhood, is there somebody breaking into your house and your neighbor's house? Pastor Matthew, who are you gonna call? The
social worker. Yeah, I don't want Ghostbusters coming. We need the police, and as Pastor Carter said earlier, in many of these instances, there were black people who called the police. What was the brother's name in Wisconsin that was shot outside of the girl's house who called the police? He had broken in and had raped her before. Yeah. And it was back at her house, had a restraining order. She called the police, and then he was shot, and he was this innocent guy. We're like, wait a minute, this was a rapist back at the victim's house, raped her in the bed with her child at the same time, by the way. Mm-hmm. Who are you going to call? She had called the police, and now it was no justice, no peace. Yeah, it's something. And if I can add to that, we've gone through now generations of our music and media. I know I'm on KJIW, but we've been niggas and whores for how long? For at least 2-3 generations, and that's celebrated. That's not canceled. 250,000 YouTube videos have been taken off of YouTube recently because of an agenda that you don't want opposing videos. But you got Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion laying around in snakes, humping on one another.
Celebrate.
Yeah, but and so this is our image of motherhood. This is our image of fatherhood, and so there will be no shortage of idiots to go and confront the police because they're being sold that this is what manhood is. And so the thief comes not but to steal, kill, and destroy. So the enemy ultimately is bigger than black and white, y'all. Right. The enemy wants anarchy, and if he can use our hurt and our pain to facilitate and to be the catalyst of it, he wants to destroy it. We need the police. We need the police. We need politicians. And so and many people would say, well, I didn't mean defund, get rid of the police. We just want to take some of the funds away and make sure they act right. Well, yeah, okay, so hamper the police. And every city that's doing that is finding themselves in trouble. So, yeah.
So defunding the police is what you say is another tool.
That's right.
Jesus talked about lawlessness is going to come.
Right.
So is this another tool? If you defund the police and get rid of the police, we already have a crime problem in a lot of cities. It's just going to get worse, right? Because you're not going to be able to call Ghostbusters nor the police, will you?
Right.
Nope.
That's the whole idea. I mean, that's create lawlessness, create chaos. Satan is pointing to and heading towards his man, the Antichrist, to get it, and he's going to come in and bring peace, or he's going to pretend he's bringing peace, and he's going to deceive a lot of people. But it's got to be a lot of chaos, a lot of confusion, a lot of things all messed up, and then here he comes in, and he's going to take that. But we know that. The Bible already told us that. So why fall for it?
Yep.
And before we do that,
we're leaving.
We spent a lot of time on this subject, but just before we do it about defunding the police, if you want to defund the police, they say they don't want a militarized police force, but the criminals are militarized. Right. If you defund the police and don't want the police coming in full riot gear, don't want the police to have automatic weapons, but they fighting against a criminal that is fully armed. Mm-hmm. Now, that's kind of like a movie that we watched, and you've been knowing about this, Elijah, but the man was shooting an automatic rifle, and then somebody jumped up with a repeater, pow, pow, pow. He said, put that little old thing down. And that's we want a police force that can match the force that opposes it.
That's right.
So I don't think it's a good thing, but I know it's not a good thing, and they know it's not a good thing to defund the police. The police need to be armed to the tooth because the enemy is armed to the tooth.
Yeah.
All right.
Right, and we need to stop being so gullible. Mm-hmm. We have LeBron James telling us that we're being hunted down by the cops, but he's using police as escorts in every NBA city he enters.
Yep.
And when he claimed that he had somebody spray paint a bad word on his property, who did he call? He called the cops. So we're listening to people that have no integrity themselves. And it also goes to this narrative of erasing accountability. Right? You are an adult when you embrace accountability. You are
Right.
responsible for your actions. But there are forces that are trying to convince us we shouldn't have accountability. That everything that happens to us, we should be blaming somebody else,
Right.
even though we're responsible for what we're doing.
That's good.
All
That's
right.
good, brother.
Now, I want to move to the next subject real quickly. We are running out of time, and I want to say this: that in 1967, Stokely Carmichael, a Black Power advocate and member of the Black Panther Party, he was the first one to coin the phrase systemic racism or institutional racism. He described as an example of systemic racism, and this was the example that he used, when 500 black babies die each year because of the lack of proper food, shelter, and medical facilities, and thousands more are destroyed and maimed physically, emotionally, and intellectually because of conditions of poverty and discrimination in the black community. That is a function of institutional racism. Now, I remember when Stokely Carmichael, H. Rap Brown, Malcolm X, and others were in opposition to Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement strategy of nonviolence. And that brings us to the subject number 2. If we look at then and we look at now, is America in this new millennium, 2021, especially in comparison to the 1920s, the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, is America a systemic racist country? Is this systemic racism that's being now echoed all over a revival of a terminology to sow seed of bitterness and anger to manipulate for political purposes and power? Is America like it was then? Is the problem systemic racism, or in the face of so many opportunities that blacks have now that they did not have then, is it a case now of we are self-destructing in the black community? Are blacks themselves perpetrators of systemic racism when over 70% of black babies are born out of wedlock, the sin of fornication, the deterioration of the family, and no fathers in the home? Black leadership in the home and in the churches is a big failure. The filth and decadence that is tolerated by blacks in the entertainment industry, and over 20 million black babies being aborted or murdered by the genocide of abortion because of what the federal government has legalized. And it is reported that the leaders of the Democratic Party, where this is sanctioned, that there are 70% of blacks that are members of. Talk about this a little bit.
Well, I mean, what we need to do is to start thinking, kind of like Brother TJ said, Minister TJ, we need to start thinking for ourselves and stop believing lies. People telling us what they want to hear, getting us upset, getting us angry. Just and look at that is trying to hold you in your past. Everybody know that if you just think about it, we are much better off now than we were 20, 30, 40 years ago, 50 years in 1967. I just pulled a statistic on that. And now we're at like 70-some% of our children are raised in fatherless homes. Well, in 1966, that number was reversed. It was 67% that had their biological parent in their home. So we almost did a 180 as far as the family is concerned. Then let's look at why are we trying to hold people back 50 or 100 years ago, 150 years ago, making people think about that. You cannot do anything about your present and your future if you're concentrating on your past. You can't change your past. Now, just for a quick, and I'll say this and let somebody else talk, look at our progress of blacks in this country. Now, as far as bachelor degrees, look at how many of us have bachelor degrees. I just want to throw a number out there. In 2019, 40% of whites age 25 and older had bachelor degrees or higher, up from 32.2% in 2010. Blacks rose, we're not declining, we rose from 19.8 in that same time period to 26.1 getting bachelor degrees or higher. We have more education now. We have more ownership, more wealth than we ever had. There are more millionaire blacks and wealthy black people now than ever. Compare that to 1967 or compare that 150 years ago. Look how far we have prospered, and look at our prosperity in our communities. Look how many of us have jobs and businesses. And look around. If you think that we're doing bad, look at some of the cars we ride in. Just look at your neighborhood. Look at what some of the cars that people are driving. Look at some of the clothes that people are wearing. We are doing a whole lot better. True, 150 years ago, there was systemic racism. That is, the government, the government was enforcing Jim Crow laws and all this other stuff, But now the Constitution changed all that. The bylaws changed all that. So we ought to focus on our successes rather than our failures. I'll let somebody else talk on it.
Well, I guess what I would like to say is that there was a time when blacks couldn't be quarterbacks.
Right.
There was a time when blacks couldn't be coaches.
Right.
There was a time blacks could not play in the NBA. There were times when, I remember when I was a kid growing up, basically they just considered black people as entertainers, tap dancing, and boxing.
Right.
And now you look at, and even you were not allowed to interracially married. And here you are, you have now a black female who's the vice president married to a white man. And that happened 60 years ago, they both would have been tarred and feathered. You had the first black president where if it wasn't for white people, he wouldn't have been president of the United States. Is that right?
That's true.
Is that right?
Right.
So all of it's amazing at all of the things and its opportunities.
Positive thing.
It's opportunities we're not taking advantage of. Would you concur with that, Bishop Matthew?
Well, I would say ditto. But I would say that, I am a descendant of slaves. My parents' parents' were 3/5 of human beings. We were chattel. We were nothing. And look where the Lord has brought us from. I don't reflect on that with bitterness. I reflect on it to say, wow, the Lord has taken us from somewhere, and I have a great opportunity to stand on the shoulders of those who have come before us and to leverage it to the glory of God and to the blessing of my community. And so you're right. 1863 with the passing of the Emancipation Proclamation, slavery ended. 1865 with the passing of the 13th Amendment. We had all things, the Reconstruction to come on the heels of that, but and all kinds of things that have happened since then. But you're right. Life is much greater. We are not chattel. We are not Dred Scott being sent back in chains. We have opportunity, and the challenge for us is the most radical revolutionary thing that we can do. Is there's no white man, black man, nobody can make me leave my wife. There's no white supremacy that's gonna make me drink no Cavazier or no Hennessy, or smoke Newports or to smoke a spliff. I don't care how tough things get. That our resistance must be to be what to defy whatever some racist somewhere thinks or whatever else, to be what God has called for us to be. And so to raise our children to be upstanding men, to sit here with the CEO of KJIW, black-owned radio station. You mentioned Obama. You didn't mention Elijah Monday. Yeah, sit with the owner of the black-owned radio station in the Mid-South. Come on now, and we can talk like we talking now, that in spite of what white folks think, our children will thrive, that your children out here running this whole production right here. Who can't tell me that God ain't good? I know our history. I know how slaves were made. I know how slaves were broken. I know our history going all the way back all the way back through ancient Africa. But the beautiful thing is that God has given us a grand opportunity to leverage what we have now. And I believe that until Jesus comes, I'm going to give all that I have to use every opportunity. Can I say this last thing? If you can't make it in America, you can't make it nowhere in the world.
Amen, bro.
I done lived around the world. I done lived in Africa, and I done traveled to, 26 African countries. I can help you to get citizenship in Zimbabwe or Rwanda or Kenya, with some beautiful places, by the way, beautiful people. But they don't have the opportunities that we have here. If you can't make it here, with the problems we have here? Because when you get there, people look the same. They don't care about your black skin. You also, I'm Zulu, you Sutu, I'm Ndebele. And you'll find out real quick you ain't moving. And so you're going to have some challenges. Life is hard, period. And I think many of our people have been disillusioned to think that if I was white, everything would just go all right. And just look around. There's a lot of poor and disenfranchised white folks, too. So I'm sorry. But you asked a question that just hit me in the heart there. God has been good to us. The God that brought us out of slavery, the God that brought us out of Jim Crow, the God that's brought us from being strange fruit has given us the opportunity to be on KJIW and to be able to talk and proclaim his goodness on a regular basis. And so I'm teaching my children to read just as you. I'm loving my wife, having many children, raising those children, and using our church as a launching pad to impact the community. We are free.
Is there a danger, gentlemen?
I think that, no, I was going to say, I think I want to piggyback on that. I think that we really need to take a long look at ourselves. You know, if I find out that my son is failing school, right, my first initial reaction is to make sure that he's doing his part, that he's studying, that he's dedicating the time and the effort into his work. My first reaction isn't to just blame the teacher and say that, oh, she hates him or she's racist or she's this or that. But even if I did that, if the next year he runs into the same problem and I continue to blame the next teacher and then the next year and then the next year, at some point it starts to look silly. I need to start looking at my son. And just like that in the black community, when I see high abortion rates, when I see all the broken homes, when I see the decadence in the black music and black film and how we elevate the lowest common denominator in the black culture, and I know none of it aligns with biblical truth. None of it aligns with what God has prescribed in his Bible. And I know that God is not mocked. My question is, why would we expect to prosper when we're rebelling against God like this?
Right.
There's something that happened. There's something that happened in the Garden of Eden, and that's something that I've seen where you blame the white man, you blame the system, you blame racism, and that is after they had eaten of the tree of knowledge, something happened, and I see that now. Adam blamed Eve, right. Did he not? Right. And then one way blame, he said, that woman that you gave me. And when he went to Eve, Eve blamed the devil. Right. But it's not like they were taking personal responsibility for their own sins. And so they blaming somebody else, and that seems like that is rampant and pervasive all around us. It's somebody else's fault. I remember at a football game, a high school football game, all of the things they did wrong, this black team, and they lost by 1 point. And they sat there and said the referees cheated. Yeah. Now, they didn't think about all the things they messed up on, pass interceptions, penalties, and all that stuff. And they said it's the referees cheated. They always said somebody else is responsible for me losing. Is somebody else responsible for me for not getting where I am? Can you talk a little bit about that? I think we got about 5 minutes left.
Well, it's easy to blame somebody else for your own shortcomings. That's the easy way out. But we are a blessed people. We have to take responsibilities for our own actions. The Lord said, if a man don't work, he don't eat. So we can't blame others for our downfall. Even when there are people who are trying to hold us back, we still have to put forth the effort and do our very best. My mom raised us telling us that you're going to have to be twice as good to make it in this world. That's right. And I've lived to see that. Mama was right. You got to be twice as good if you're going to really succeed in this life. But I do want to respond to the racism in America. As long as there are people, there's going to be racism. And as long as there are sinful people, there's going to be more racism. But racism can only hold us back if we feed into the deception of racism. People are going to dislike people no matter what their color, no matter where they're from. We're going to have to always do the best we can at what we are doing, no matter what obstacles are in our way. We're going to have to persevere. We're going to have to push forward. We cannot, I think somebody already said this, but we cannot go forward if we're always looking back. And I've heard preachers say it time and time again. If you're going to prosper, you can't allow your past to hold you back. And so if there are those who are trying to keep you from achieving, you're going to have to achieve in the face of those people who are trying to hold you back. Is there racism? Yes, there is. But can racism stop us from prevailing? And the answer to that question is no, because as you said, we've come a mighty long ways. Racism couldn't hold us back then. It ain't gonna hold us back now. It's not holding us back now because we have the best life that our parents only dreamed of, and we are living it today.
Well, you know,
And pay attention to the people that tell us we can't do it.
Yep.
These are people that are making millions of dollars putting a basketball through a goal, that are on the news every single night, that make millions of dollars telling us fake news and all kinds of propaganda. They're making millions of dollars peddling an ideology that is meant to keep us back. So if they made it, why can't we make it?
Right. Amen.
You know, one of the big issues when the church was born and the gospel was going forth, and this is an example of what Pastor Carter was saying, we are, because of sinful people, you're going to have class struggles, you're going to have racism, you're going to have, one of the biggest people is the Jews hated the Samaritans, the Gentiles hated the Samaritan hated the Jews, the Samaritan hated the Gentiles. That was a big issue then. And you see this throughout history, and that's because of sinful man. Right. And the only solution and hope for that is the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. So, Pastor Carter, you're right. These things are going to be here, but we cannot allow those to impact us, because when you focus on that, that makes us bitter and angry and unthankful to God. Just like the children of Israel were brought out of Egypt by the mighty handworks of God, and they got over there and got scared. That's right. And started complaining and grumbling, and they were not thankful. They did not see how God could bless. They did not see the things that you're talking about. Can I get an amen on that?
Amen on that.
Well, we've run out of time, so ladies and gentlemen, I've been in this forum here talking about these issues with Pastor Milton Hall of the Bible Deliverance Church in Marion, Arkansas. Pastor Hall, thank you.
Amen.
Pastor Leroy Carter of the Uplifting Ministries of Crumrod, Arkansas. Thank you, Pastor Carter, for your input. Minister T.J. Hunt out of Manassas, Virginia. Thank you, Minister T.J. And
Thank you.
Pastor Vincent Matthews of Tabernacle Church of God in Christ here in South Haven, Mississippi. Thank you for your input. We're going to be talking more about this, because we've got to get out the counseling of God. We got to get out the righteousness. What does God have to say about it? Even dealing with this virus.
Yes.
Even dealing with the virus, how they leave God out.
Yes.
In some kind of ways, wearing a mask, some kind of ways, a vaccine is going to be our salvation. And people are more worried about that than they are about their own salvation in eternity. Right. So we got to talk about that. We got to bring God into our counseling. God bless you, and thank you very much for your participation. I'm Elijah Mundy, your moderator for this occasion.